A big thanks goes out to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. Well, hello everybody, welcome to another video. Thank you ever so much for joining me this week. I really appreciate it. For those of you that are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Adam Gibbs and I'm a nature photographer living on Vancouver Island in the beautiful province of British Columbia, Canada. If you've been following my channel for the last several weeks, I've been talking a lot about composition, and one of the reasons being is that I find that a lot of the content on YouTube around photography tends to concentrate more on gear. So I wanted to talk more about the things that I love, and that's light and composition. So today I want to chat about something that can make or break a photo, and that's the small stuff. Things like checking the edges of your frame, noticing the little details that add up, and also knowing when to stop fussing over a composition. Because if we're not careful, it's very easy to polish a composition so much that it loses its spark, or perhaps becomes too contrived, or even ultimately lifeless. So without further delay, let's get stuck into the video. When you're out shooting, it's very natural to focus just on the subject. And I've done this in the past as well, and I still do it now. Sometimes we get so caught up in the subject that we kind of lose sight of what's happening around that subject. However, the truth is that what's happening around the edges can be just as important. A bright rock, a stray branch, or even a patch of sky creeping into the corner. It's those little things that pull the eye whether you want them to or not. So before you press the shutter, take a moment to pause, scan the frame corner to corner, and ask yourself, does everything in here deserve to be here? Sometimes the fix is tiny, step a foot to the left, tilt the camera down, or wait for a shadow to shift. It's those little adjustments that can make the difference between a photo that feels cluttered and one that feels intentional. This first example is a raw file of an image that I took up in Huson Caves, which is North Vancouver Island, a couple of weeks ago. And the reason why I picked this image is because it's still fresh in my mind. This is the main entrance to one of the larger caves in the area, and it's a popular scene with a lot of photographers because we have this really great conifer standing in the middle of the frame. It's a great shape. It was a very sunny day, so we're in the shade, so the light is a little bit flat. But there are a couple of things wrong with this composition that I noticed after I'd taken the first couple of shots, and then I started to finesse my composition. The first thing was the light bleeding into the corner here. As I said, it was quite sunny. This is quite a bright spot. So this is something to be aware of, is look around the edges of your frame. Now this is quite easy to get rid of. I could just crop it out, or I can burn it in. The other thing that bugged me about this composition, which would be a little bit harder to get rid of in post-processing, is the way that this tree merges with the boulder in the background. So in this case, it's just a matter of noticing those little things. Now, it may seem very trivial at the time, but when you have all these little trivial things add up in your composition, they can kind of ruin the feel of the photograph. So in this case, it was just a matter of changing my position and then going for a slightly different angle so that all of a sudden now we have a tree that is better separated from that little rock, and the background is a little bit more friendly for this tree. Now this is the final image. I have processed this, so I have lightened the tree and darkened the background. But I think most of you will agree that this is probably a much cleaner composition. Now, that's not to say that there are a few things that I still would like to change. The fact that some of these branches merge with the rock kind of bugs me a little bit. But in a lot of cases, it's about compromise. There are compromises. And in the grand scheme of things, if you're showing this to, say, another viewer, sometimes they won't even notice these things. But I do think that in this case, separating it from that rock was a good choice. This is another photograph that I took on the same trip as the last one. This is San Joseph Bay up in North Vancouver Island. It was an absolutely gorgeous morning, and I love the composition, the light coming up behind the trees. This is more or less the raw file. I have brightened it up a bit so it's easier to see. But it wasn't until after I'd spent quite a bit of time finessing this and taken a number of photographs that I noticed that one of the things that I think kind of would have improved the photograph was to include the whole reflection in the water there. Because we have this beautiful curve here, but it kind of gets interrupted by this reflection. Now, as it is, I still quite like it. There are a few footprints in here. Those are my own. I would probably clone those out. If I'd known that I was going to take a shot this way, I wouldn't have walked right through the middle of it. But this is kind of the beginning of looking at a scene and thinking, oh, this is really cool. And then you take a few photographs, and then once you've had time to calm down, slow down and start thinking a bit more critically about, well, how can you improve it, if at all? And if you do make improvements, will it actually be an improvement, or will it just make the image look even more static and less lively? Now, I did find another composition, but I ended up having to take a vertical composition because the sun had risen quite high by that point. And if I did a horizontal or a landscape, I was getting quite a bit of lens flare. But as you can see in this photograph, what I've done now is I've raised my camera position so that I'm including the whole reflection here. What that has done is really emphasized the curve in this sand here. And I think in this instance, it's important because that's what's leading you into the frame. If it's interrupted by something, then your eye kind of stops here. But because it's quite bright, it continues and brings you into the rest of the frame. If you study photographs that you enjoy or deem successful, whether your own or somebody else, you'll see that it's often because everything in the frame just seems to fall into place. Now, even though there might be a main subject that perhaps gets all of the attention, it's often the supporting cast that really carries the picture. Now, of course, not all successful photographs are crafted this way, but I think if you really study the work of those artists that you admire, they will all have this common thread. Textures in the rocks, a patch of moss, the way branches lean into the frame on their own. They don't seem like much, but together they give an image depth and life. When a photo feels like it's been taken with intent, it's usually because those details weren't ignored. Now, the viewer might not consciously notice these details, but collectively they contribute to the whole composition. This is another recent shot that I took on the way to Carmanah Provincial Park, which is on the west coast of Vancouver Island. We came across these wonderful big leaf maples covered in moss right on the side of the logging road. And I personally could only find one angle that I really liked. I was here with a couple of friends of mine. I put this in here because I think that even a slight shift in camera position can, in my eye, really improve a composition quite a bit. Now, to some of you, you might look at these two images that I'm going to show you and think, well, really doesn't make that much difference. But to me at the time, it did make quite a bit of difference. The one thing that I really loved about this whole scene was this beautiful branch at the bottom covered in moss. But I also loved the branches drooping down like so. Now, I quite like this composition, but with a slight shift, I decided to de-emphasize this area and emphasize the curvature of this branch. So basically all I did was raise my camera ever so slightly, and then I also moved over to the right, because I know, again, it seems very trivial, but this tree back here was bothering me a little bit. So in the final image, here's the final image here, you can see that all of a sudden I've put more emphasis on these green leaves and the curvatures of the branches. And I think that this is a better composition. Now, again, it's very subjective. I'm sure there's a few of you or many of you that will say, oh, I much preferred the other one. Or there might be a bunch of you who say, you know, it really doesn't matter. That's not really the point. The point is that it's really important to me to try and define what it is you're trying to show in your composition. What are you trying to emphasize? And then once you've figured it out, compose in a way that can best emphasize what you really want to show. And I figured it out that it wasn't really this branch, although it's a beautiful branch. It was really the curvature and the overhanging branches that I thought were more important than the bottom section there. And I think I've achieved my goal. There is a danger to all of this though, and that is overthinking a composition through. And I've done it myself. I've often been so caught up in micromanaging a scene that by the time I take the shot, the magic is more or less gone. And the result is a technically correct photograph that feels dead. It's neat, it's tidy, but it's lifeless. The very thing that inspired me to take the image has been lost. So photography isn't about perfection, it's about connection. Sometimes a bit of softness or light that doesn't fall exactly evenly is what gives a picture its character. After all, for me anyway, I want to rekindle the same emotion that I felt when I made the image, not what I did technically. This is an older image of mine that I really do like. I love the light. This is the finished version. But there's one thing in this scene that's always bugged me a little bit. And I think, or I'd like to think that since I've taken this shot, I've improved quite a bit, and I would probably notice the problem with this photograph and correct it. Even though there's some beautiful light on this branch, what bugs me about it is the fact that it overlaps the trees in the background. You'll notice that there's a really great opportunity here with the curve of the rock to actually isolate this branch in that curve of the rock. So all it would have taken on my part would be to get down just a little bit lower so that we're shooting up at the tree, and then you could lay those branches into that curvature. And that's what I mean by photographing with intent. It's these little tricks, these little things that will really improve your photography or your compositions anyway. Now again, most people aren't going to notice that. And like I said, I still really like the photograph. I love the light. But every time I look at this, I think, if only I just got down just a little bit lower. But I'll never know unless I go back to this location and try and find this tree again. For those of you that are interested, this is Opaban Plateau in Yoho National Park, an absolutely fantastic place to photograph. Thank you once again to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. Are you ready to take your online presence to the next level? Meet Design Intelligence by Squarespace, a fusion of world-class design and AI technology that unlocks your creative potential like never before. Build a stunning, personalized website that's as unique as you are and stands out from the crowd. With Squarespace Payments, managing transactions is easier than ever. Get started in just a few clicks and let your customers pay their way, whether it's Apple Pay, Afterpay, or more. Need to invoice clients? Squarespace has you covered. Simplify your workflow and focus on growing your business. If you're interested in building an awesome website, why not head on over to squarespace.com and give it a try. And if you like what you find, use the code AdamGibbs for 10% off your first purchase. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned micromanaging or overdoing a composition to the point where you might just knock all the life out of it. And because of that, over the last year or two anyway, I've decided that some of the little things that would have kind of bugged me in the past, I'm going to just leave in the photograph. And now this photograph here, I've used this as an example in presentations that I've done before, because the element that I've left in there is quite large and it does draw your eye to it. So I use it more as an example. There have been times where I've thought about getting rid of this little area, and other times I think, well, I'm just going to leave it. And that is the white rock down here. Now, it would be very easy to just clone that out, or probably in my case, I would just darken it ever so slightly so you're not drawn to it as much. My point is that, well, we can always find things wrong with our compositions. And if we keep correcting every single one of them, then that's what I mean. It gets to the point where you're micromanaging an image and just knocking all the life out of it. There are a number of other things in this composition that I would have liked different as well. One of them being, this branch here overlapping with a tree. I didn't really like that very much either. But to get rid of that, I would have had to move over to the left more. And then if I did that, then all of a sudden you might have problems with this section here. Other things that bug me a little bit are, I wish I'd left a little bit more room at the top of the frame. So there's always something that's going to bug you in your compositions. It's just knowing when to let go. So what's the answer? Well, I think it's balance. Pay attention to the edges, respect the little details, but don't let those things smother the reason you stopped and lifted the camera in the first place. When you're in doubt, ask yourself, does this photo still feel like what excited me about the scene? And if yes, then you've probably done enough. In the next few examples, I just want to point out really quickly what I was trying to achieve by separating the main subject or a subject from usually a background. Most of them are quite obvious, but I'll point them out anyway. So you can see in this first photograph, my biggest concern was merging the main flower here with the background flower. So I've made sure that they aren't merging at all. In this second photograph here, you can see that this pine tree, I've tried to make sure that it's not merging with any of the pine trees in the background. In this shot here, I actually made a video of this several years ago, San Josef Bay, and my big concern was merging this pinnacle with these rocks in the foreground. So we just have this little line here, and it's just basically making sure that your perspective is in the right position, your camera's right in the right position, so you're not getting any of those elements merging. Same with this photograph here. You can see that I've tried to compose this so that there is a gap in between. There's no merging in the middle here. May seem very trivial, but at the time, that was the important thing for me. Images like this one, I didn't want this little icicle here merging with this little pointy bit here. And then lastly, this one was kind of a fun one with my friend Jeremy Jackson. It wasn't until I started playing around with the composition that I noticed that this little branch here was kind of cradling this tiny little island in the background there. So I really quite enjoyed that little element. In retrospect, I probably should have given this branch a little bit more room so it wasn't so close to the island. And also down here, it would have been nice if there was a gap in between these branches. And you're probably thinking, well, why does it really matter? Well, as I've said, it probably doesn't matter, but to my eye, it just kind of blocks a pathway through that little section of branches there. So what intent really boils down to is, especially with nature photography and landscape photography, is to slow down. Now, I know this isn't always the case with some scenes, but by slowing down, you get to scan the edges, and you also might start noticing some of those smaller things. But don't overwork them. Let your photo breathe. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you find yourself overthinking compositions, or do you shoot more by instinct? Thanks ever so much, everybody, for watching this week's video. I hope, as always, you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give us the old thumbs up. That's always appreciated. And also, I'll mention again, if you'd like to go over to my website and sign up for my newsletter, every month I'm giving away a free print or two to subscribers. But to find out whether you've won or not, you actually have to read the newsletter. All right, until next time, bye-bye.